Hello, scholars! Today, on this episode of You Choose Lore, we are going to be discussing Queen Yharnam and the Old Lords and what exactly Mergo is. And today on this episode, I have two very special guests. I have the wonderful Richard Pilbeam from Jerk Sans Frontiers, and he is also the co-host of Sinclair Lore's Snack Covenant podcast. Highly recommend you check those out. And I also have TerrifiedOfGhosts, who 2 years ago wrote a post called Melted in Blood on the Bloodborne subreddit. And so I have him here today to explain the history of Pthumeru.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? A lot of people make this, see Pthumeru as kind of this, where we don't have a lot of lore, but it's actually, just really well dug into the game. You really have to, dive in to look for it. The game actually gives us a lot of clues about, the progression of the Pthumerians and how they kind of evolved as a society. And the first of these, kind of occurs in two items. The first is the Bone Ash set, which talks about the keepers of the Old Lords, who are the keepers of the Great Ones, and the second Pthumeru Hill Chalice, which calls the Pthumerians initially just the humble servants of the Great Ones. So what they start out as initially are essentially the menial servants of the Great Ones, protecting their eldritch sleep for generations, going on God knows whatever eldritch errands these sleeping deities may have. Until at one point in their evolution as a society, so to speak, they decided to turn away from being mere servants of the Great Ones and to choose a leader and possibly become a Great One themselves. A lot of people will tell you that the reason that Ebrietas, I never know how to pronounce that, but the reason is the left behind Great One is because she didn't ascend to the cosmos with all of her friends.
That's how I took it, yeah.
Yeah.
Another reading of that line that you can come to if you start to think about when you start looking at the Ease Chalice dungeons and what they look like and where the enemies are placed within them. The Ease Chalice dungeons are full of tomb mold and arcane haze and are really dark. And it looks like no one's really been keeping these up for a very long time. And when you actually go into the enemy placement of the fixed chalice there, you'll actually see that there's only one keeper of the Old Lords in the entire chalice dungeon, and it's hanging out on the first layer, not even anywhere near Ebrietas, which is weird because every other strong enemy keeper of the Old Lords is around some other Great One, immediately so on their layers, protecting their layers from above, and Ebrietas doesn't have anyone near to her. So you could almost see it as the Pthumerians abandoned Ebrietas and decided to follow a new leader, who was the Queen.
Right.
So the blood contract in the betrothal ring is referring to a swapping of blood. It's a sacred vow that is bound by the swapping of blood between two or more parties. In this case, that blood contract is to produce a special heir, which would essentially makes Yharnam the bride of the Great One, whose blood she receives, and she, which is why she wears something of a wedding dress at all times. It's not clear whether she's willingly a part of this, considering the fact that she is shackled.
Yeah.
And also that the description for the Ring of Betrothal and for the Pthumeru Hill Chalice sort of being a process of selection, someone was chosen, kind of like a sacrifice. Hey, beautiful woman, you're going to be the bride of God. Congratulations. Don't really care how you feel about that, but it's happening.
Well, they'd presumably be chosen based on the strength of their blood, if that's how they're conceiving.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
In order to bear this special child for the Great Ones who seem to have some difficulty conceiving themselves, or at least like bringing new life to term, like on their own accord.
Right.
They would give blood to this chosen woman, and she would give birth to an infant Great One to continue on the Great One's lineage, which is where the heir rune comes from. The idea that like everything desires to pass on its blood, and this is no different for the Great Ones than it is for anything else.
And so, what's the idea of like people's consciousness is like in their blood?
Essentially, blood is kind of the executor of our intellect, of our spirit, of our being. It's the medium of the highest grade, so to speak. Like it carries what is us more than anything else. At least like thematically, as far as Bloodborne is concerned.
Well, they talk about that with the blood gems. The idea being that like the nature of the blood in something defines what it is.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Blood defines an organism.
Yes.
And so it like it's what makes us so definitively us, and also contains like bits of what the game would call insight, like bits of our consciousness and intelligence. Just basically everything that makes up us. So when you pass on your blood to something else, you are essentially giving yourself to that thing. Essentially, it's kind of like you are what you eat.
Yeah.
Like it's because like every time we as a hunter go out and we kill a beast, we get a little beast blood within us. We get a little bit of them within us. When we kill Ram, we get a little bit of Ram within us, which is why the doll is like, oh, I sense the ancient echoes that course through your veins. Like she feels the old blood in you now. As far as like, you know, some like ancient ideas are concerned, like you pass on blood, you have my blood, etc., etc. I mean, we still use these ancient concepts when we talk about our blood, like our family's blood, your blood. Like we still use these concepts even in modern day, just because we are connected genetically, yes, but you know, before we had any concept of that, we were connected by blood, by single chains of unbroken life.
And so, well, like, what are all the dangling upside down bodies throughout like Pthumeru and the Underground Labyrinth?
Those are supposed to recall bloodletting, essentially like slitting the throat and draining a body entirely of blood. It also is meant to invoke the idea of like blood rushing to the head. And I kind of don't know where I'm going with that angle so much, to be entirely honest, but like
it looks like the hunter's mark.
Yeah.
There's that.
Yes,
Yeah.
It looks like the hunter's mark, and I think like that's no coincidence.
No, it's not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
because like the reason like it's called the hunter's mark by people in like characters in the game call it that, but that isn't
right.
necessarily its actual like meaning in the language of the Great Ones. It could have meant sacrifice or something like that.
Yeah.
But the
Right,
hunters
exactly.
adopt it, so it becomes hunter. Yeah.
Yes, it could mean like chosen. It could mean bride. Like it could mean like any number of things because it's so ancient that its meaning has been effectively lost. But
Yeah.
the rules do a good job of saying like people now have adopted it to mean this concept
Yeah.
of hunters.
And when you encounter Queen Yharnam, there's that altar behind her. And it's possible if you do enough root chalices to get a variant where the top of the altar is removed and that has a gigantic hunter's mark on it.
Oh, really?
So she is when you meet her and she's praying, she's literally praying to a gigantic hunter's mark. You just can't see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious, and it's all over the Chalice dungeon.
Yeah.
So it's like very obviously like a symbol that the Pthumerians revered. Our hunters now have simply adopted it, which almost comes back to the idea that like we are inheriting some of this from them, like the kind of idea that it's like, oh, this has happened before and will happen again. That the game plays on. So when we see those dead bodies, they're indicative of blood being collected, because things kind of figured out as time went on, I'm sure, was that if a Great One's blood conscious plus the Queen could make a little Great One, then what happens if you mix some of your blood consciousness in as well? Or even just mix everyone's blood consciousness in willy-nilly, because if everybody has little bits and pieces of their like intellect and intelligence and insight in their blood, what happens when all of that comes together and all is melted in blood, as the ritual blood says?
Right.
Does that produce the same effect? And it's kind of unclear whether just everything has Great One blood in it at some point, or the sheer amount of built up like will in, you know, hundreds or thousands of people's blood can achieve the same effect. But regardless, it seems that if given to the right woman with the right type of blood, this amalgamated blood can produce a child of blood, like the Kinehurst Vial Bloods did, or Queen Yharnam did with Mergo. Your blood contains everything that makes you, and a little bit of your will. And a little, if you mix it up with other people's will, it's a little bit of their will too, and so on and so forth, until you can get like giant monstrosities, if you think about it, like the one reborn, or the amalgamated corpses that we find in Yar Ghul. It's essentially the same idea. It's when all is melted in the same substance, all can be reborn as something else. Turning many into one. Great One is a pun. Like, Great One is actually a pun. It's not, it doesn't just mean like great, like it means like, yes, like a great entity, but it also could mean like a great amalgamation of entities.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that you can see when you go into the areas where you fight the Great Ones in the Chalice dungeons are, if you look at the floors of a lot of their boss rooms, it seems to be like you'll see kind of a radial pattern of what look like almost tombstones laid into the floor. There's no inscriptions on them anymore.
Yeah.
But it's to me, it kind of spoke to like, if those are graves, it's like the idea of, it's like these multiple things united to create one thing.
Okay.
And whether that's through blood or that's through insight or both or what have you, it's the reason that Mensis becomes the great and terrifying brain, because all of their wills are like channeled to one thing that then Mergo gives essentially like brain birth and dreams it into the nightmare. It's the collectivization of will.
So just to summarize everything that Terrified of Ghosts explained, the underground labyrinth used to be ruled by the Great Ones like Ebrietas, or whatever her species was before they all disappeared. The eldest Pthumerians were used as servants to expand and defend the tombs of the Great Ones. As well, certain female Pthumerians among the population were used essentially as like these like reproductive sex slaves to give birth to future Great Ones, because Great Ones can't seem to reproduce normally. The chosen woman would drink the blood of the Great One, and that's how she'd conceive the next child. This was the tradition until newer Pthumerians turned away from the old traditions and named themselves a queen, presumably Queen Yharnam, or a woman who preceded Queen Yharnam. The whole blood consciousness thing really comes from a Victorian-era poet named D.H. Lawrence. One of his letters reads, "Now I am convinced of what I believed when I was about 20, that there is another seat of consciousness than the brain and the nerve system. There is a blood consciousness which exists in us independently of the ordinary mental consciousness, which depends on the eye as its source or connector. There is the blood consciousness with the sexual connection, holding the same relation as the eye, and seeing, holds to the mental consciousness. One lives, knows, and has one's being in the blood, without any reference to nerves and brain. This is one half of life belonging to the darkness, and the tragedy of this, our life, and of your life, is that the mental and nerve consciousness exerts a tyranny over the blood consciousness, and that your will has gone completely over to the mental consciousness, and is engaged in the destruction of your blood being, or blood consciousness. The final liberating of the one, which is only death in result." Bloodborne may be taking a similar take on Lawrence's work, where the human body is just like a shell to hold blood, and the blood is the essence of a person's true identity or consciousness or soul or whatever you want to call it. When bodies are drained of blood and that blood is pooled together, it's as if everyone's souls are amalgamating together into the same substance and becoming a singular collective amalgamative organism. So the individual barriers that are dividing people and keeping people isolated are suddenly broken down and a great one is created. This is how Mergo was made. The people of Pthumeru drained away all their blood. The blood was collected into a holy chalice, and Queen Yharnam drank everyone's blood from the chalice. Everyone's blood, which is the very essence of everyone's souls, settled into Queen Yharnam's womb, and that created Mergo, the literal amalgamative reincarnation of Queen Yharnam's subjects into an infant great one. Alright, so that will do it for this episode of You Choose Lore. This was a very specific episode about really just like one person's theory. This will probably be kind of like the only one of its kind. Most episodes will try to incorporate a lot of different ideas. It's just that there aren't that many theories out there about Pthumeru, and so this one is probably like the most detailed and in-depth that I've really seen. So most of the questions on the survey are pretty much just like, is this part of the theory true? Is this part of the theory true? Is this part of the theory true? Etc., etc. Alright, so thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on You Choose Lore, where we will be talking about, I believe, Bergenworth, I think? I don't know. We'll find out. Alright, so until next time, goodbye!